Hello, I'm Michael Embry, and welcome to our fourth and final program featuring the Kentucky Book Fair authors. As many know, this is our 31st annual Kentucky Book Fair, and it will be held November 9th and November 10th at the Frankfort Convention Center. We have an array of nearly 200 authors, and you'll find books about all kinds of things, children's books, all genres of fiction, nonfiction, featuring Civil War, sports, bourbon, recipes, autobiographies, anything you want you'll find at the Kentucky Book Fair. Now the Kentucky Book Fair is the state's premier literary event, and that's why one reason it's been around for so long, and it's one of the largest book fairs in the country. And as many of you know, at least I hope you know, that proceeds from the Kentucky Book Fair benefit public and school libraries as well as literacy programs. Now, among the authors we have this year, we have Stephen Pastis, Mary McDonnell. If you don't, that name doesn't ring a bell, she played Erin in the old TV series The Waltons. Dandy McCall, an Edgar Allan Poe young adult prize winner. Judy Rosenberg, Ann Ross, Mark Wayne Adams, he's a former Disney cartoonist. Among the state authors we have Wendell Berry, Bobby Ann Mason, Al Smith, Gurney Norman, who's our current state poet laureate, Ann Gabhart, Marcia Thornton Jones, Debbie Daddy, Silas House, Jason Howard, George Ella Lyon, James Higdon, and many more. And among the 200 that will be there are three of our guests today. We have Mary Hamilton, Emilie Hannigan McCauley, and Janie McCord. And I want to welcome the three of you to our program today.
Thank you.
And I guess we'll start first with Mary. And Mary, your book is Kentucky Folktales, revealing stories, truths, and outright lies.
Correct.
In Kentucky, outright lies and stories. Tell us about your book.
Well, the book is Folktales, stories that have all been told stories before becoming written down stories. I'm a storyteller, and so what I do is tell stories. That's what I've done since 1983, and I tell mostly folk tales. And tall tales are one kind of folk tale, and tall tales are just that. They stretch the truth, and they are outright lies. Okay. So absolutely, you can't do a book of Kentucky folk tales without including some Kentucky tall tales.
Okay, now back in 1983 when you began as a storyteller, did that kind of just pique your interest about where did these stories come from, or had that you've been doing that before then?
Well, for years, my favorite section of public libraries and school libraries was 398.2. That's where the folk tales and the fairy tales are on the shelves. Okay. And so I'd been an avid reader of those types of stories for years and years and years. And I became a librarian, and storytelling was an expected part of my job. And 83 is when I went full-time with storytelling, because that's when there was an economic recession up in Michigan where I was living then, and my job disappeared. And I knew what I hoped to do someday when I had saved enough money, and I thought, all right, someday's here, let's roll. And so that's what I've done ever since. And I returned to Kentucky, my home state, in 87.
Okay. Well, where are you from in Kentucky?
Meade County. It's about 50 miles west of Louisville. Brandenburg's the county seat.
Okay.
And I grew up on a farm about 2 miles from where Meade, Hardin, and Breckinridge counties meet.
Well, did you kind of grow up in a family of storytellers? I mean, like your grandparents or
My
folks?
dad is who all my relatives think of as the family storyteller.
Okay.
This may be how I earn my living, but if you ask my relatives who's the family storyteller, they're not going to name me. They're going to name Daddy.
Okay.
And I like to say that when Daddy tells a story and you hear him talk about something that happened, it's enough to make you almost wish you hadn't been there, because the way he tells it is just different and more interesting than when you were actually there to witness it.
Storytelling, Has there been a revival of that, or is it a dying art, or what? Because I remember growing up, when I was in Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, we'd sit around the campfire, and tell scary stories and things like that. Is that still going on?
Sure, that's still happening. There's
Okay.
still a lot of storytelling around campfires, especially the scary stories. There's a lot of family stories. It's how we pass along family values, family history. It's how a lot of us know people who have died, especially those who died before we were born. We think about it, the only way we do know them is through photographs and story. And family stories are one type of folklore.
So I guess in a sense it's an oral history, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes.
Are a lot of people putting these stories or taping them for posterity, to hand down to family or for
I
researchers?
hope they are. I don't know if they are, but I do hope so. We do have a Kentucky Oral History Commission that can help people learn more about how to do that.
Yourself now, is this your first book?
Yes, my first book, and came about in an unusual way. I received an email from the acquisitions editor at University Press of Kentucky saying, "Hi, would you like to have lunch with me? I'm the regional acquisitions editor for University Press." And I thought, acquisitions editor wants to have lunch with me. Yeah, I think I'll say yes. And knew I needed to be ready to answer the question, "So Mary, if you were to write a book, what would it be like?" And so I described this book and sent her some examples, and she loved it. So.
But before then, you hadn't really given a whole lot of thought about writing a book?
Not really, no, because when you're telling the stories, it's different from writing. It's so entirely different. I hardly ever write them down. The only time I'd written them down before is when I knew I was going to be doing recordings of the stories, and then I would write out how I told it, just so in a recording studio, working with the engineer, if we needed to re-record a section, it would be easier for us to both be at the same place if the engineer had an approximation of what I was going to say, because I don't memorize them word for word. So the challenge in writing, the reader's not going to have my facial expression. They're not going to have the sound of my voice. They're not going to have the timing unless I give it to them with paragraphing and commas and punctuation marks, and there are things they're not going to have. If a character is upset, my face can show they're upset, my voice can show they are upset. Well, I have to tell them that in writing. So it was a challenge to figure out, how do I write the stories, keep them as close as I can to how they flow orally, because I wanted people to have that sense of oral storytelling when they read them, and yet make them still work for a reader who's not right in front of me, so I can't adjust as I go along by watching my listeners, because the readers aren't there, they're separate. So it's a whole different animal from telling in person.
Now the book itself, I mean, of course it has stories in it, right?
Yes,
but you
yes,
also provide
26
background
stories.
and
I sure do. Each story is followed by a commentary that talks about where the story came from, but also talks about how the story came to be in my repertoire. And in some instances, I've created charts because a folklorist, Leonard Roberts, collected maybe 9 different versions of the story. So I've created charts comparing those different versions so people can learn more about how others have told them, and told who he collected them from and where and when and that sort of information. And in other instances, I've included the complete archival text so people can read the archival text that I found, and they can compare that with how I tell it, and then they can read about what happened in between. Sometimes I don't know why I made a change. Other times I've made deliberate changes and I've talked about why. And sometimes audiences have reacted in a way that have taught me that this or that change works better. And I've talked about those instances too.
How long did it take for you to write the book then?
I had approximately a year from the time that the press said go to the deadline date. And that was good. I used most of it, turned it in a little early, but and then it was another year between that and the actual book out.
Okay. And I assume that that when you do as a storyteller, it's more than it's like your book. It's more than just telling a story, because you you have to research it yourself, don't you? I mean, that's part of the.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Finding stories to tell. In some cases, there's a historical story in there, and I needed to do a lot of research about the Civil War to make sure I had the dates right and the battles right and the infantry numbers right and those kinds of details. So sometimes there's factual detail. Other times the research goes along the lines of finding ways of remembering how the story flows so that I can really cement it in my mind, and so that I can picture it when I'm telling it and make it make sense for the listeners. So the type of research varies. I'm often looking for as many different versions as I can find to figure out what strikes me as the way that I most want to tell the story, to figure out how I want to tell it. So it varies from story to story.
So you've written one book. Do you have enough material to do volume 2 of these, or 3?
Not a volume 2 of Kentucky Tales, but definitely a volume 2 of Folktales. My husband calls it my first book, and I'm trying to share his optimism.
Okay. And well, this will be your first book fair then,
Yes.
as an author.
Yes, as an author. I go every year, I walk the aisles, I talk to authors, I buy their books, and yes, and that's always fun, but this will be my first year on the other side of the table.
Okay.
And people will find me in the children's section, even though the book is not specifically aimed at children.
Okay.
But I was looking at the map, and that's where I've been assigned.
Well, let me ask you then, are you going to participate on Children's Day?
I am, so that's probably why I got that, ended up with that table assignment.
Okay, well, that should
Because
be exciting
I
for you
do
as well
tell
then.
some stories to children, and I tell other stories, different stories, to adults.
Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate you being here, and I wish you the best of luck on
Thank you.
November 9th and 10th.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next guest is Emilie McCauley. Welcome.
Thank you.
And your book is Lunch at the Glitz.
Lunch at the Glitz.
And tell us about the Glitz.
The Glitz is a restaurant that our family began in 1988, and it is in the lower level of Irish Acres Antique Gallery out in Nonsuch, Kentucky.
Okay, is that suburban Nonsuch or?
In the heart of downtown Nonsuch.
Okay. Now, what lunch at the Glitz? Is it recipes or?
It is a collection of recipes that we began the restaurant with and have developed throughout the years. And I also wanted to include our family history, how and why we started our business, and address all of the questions that customers have been asking all of these years. So that is in the very front of our book as a dedication to my parents, and then it is followed with seasonal menus. Everything is in a seasonal format, the way that we serve it at the restaurant, giving people suggestions for how to combine appetizers with desserts if they want to entertain at home, appetizer, entree through dessert. An easy way for them to do that throughout the year.
Okay. Now the Irish Acres and the restaurant, were they founded about the same time? What, 1973
They
or
were.
so?
Our original business was opened in 1974 in eastern Kentucky, outside of Ashland.
Okay.
And this is our second location. But with the first location, we did not have a restaurant. The building in Nonsuch lended itself for a restaurant with the elementary kitchen still being intact. So my mother took one glance at the kitchen and said, "Oh, we need to serve lunch as well." Okay. So that's when we decided to not only open the antique gallery, but to revamp the kitchen, the schoolhouse kitchen, and serve lunch to all of our customers coming out. By the time they get to Nonsuch and spend the day browsing, they are hungry. So we wanted to fill that need.
You still have a lot of tour buses through there?
We do.
Okay. See,
Traveling the winding country roads.
you say that, so there are 2 Irish Acres in the state now, is that right? Or?
Our original Irish Acres is now closed.
Okay.
It was opened in 1974, and when we acquired the elementary school in Nonsuch in '84, we renovated for 2 years and opened in '86, and continued to operate the shop in Ashland for a couple more years just by appointment. Our focus had become more on this shop, but that one has since closed.
Okay, the Irish Acres, is it because of Irish heritage with the family? Or?
Our family name is Hannigan, and Originally, as I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned, our original shop was in a barn, and our farm was Irish Acres Farm. When we turned the barn into a riding stable, it became Irish Acres Stables, and when we converted the barn to the antique shop, we kept Irish Acres and made it Irish Acres Antiques.
Okay. Now, when did well, the book just came out this year, correct?
Yes, sir.
The what made you decide to sit down? I need to write a
That
book.
this was the year. Well, for years and years, our customers would have lunch and say, "You should write a cookbook. When are you going to write a cookbook?" And as a family, we talked about it often, but had not really decided to definitely do that. And I would say year after year, yes, one day we're going to write a cookbook. And at the end of last year, I thought, you know, the time I think is right. If I stand for one more year and say, yes, we're going to write a cookbook, I'm going to lose my credibility, because already they have been saying, didn't you tell us that a few years ago? So I just decided that this was the time to do it. I wanted to dedicate it to my parents and get all that family history out there, the reasons behind why we started and where we started, all of the questions that we answered day after day to customers. I wanted to include all of that, and I just felt the timing was right, so I jumped in. We close, we're seasonal, and we close for January, February, and the first part of March. So I thought that would give me a good time to get a jump start and really put all of my thoughts down. The biggest challenge, and that's what I did most of those couple months, was taking the recipes that had been created for the restaurant, which were in 40 to 50 to 60 portions, and get them back down to a family size for 8 or 10 or 12 portions.
The about how many recipes are in the book?
There are about 110 recipes,
110.
but it's been really interesting this year in talking to customers when they ask, is what we're having today in the book, is how many different ways we use so many of those recipes, because there are ways to use the sauces with other things or the dressings with other things, and that's what we try to do is teach them how to mix it up and change things up. And you know, if you're making strawberry sauce, then you can use that later for strawberry vinaigrette, those types of things, making it all interchangeable. So there are, if you use your imagination, a lot more recipes than 110.
Are they recipes that a beginner like me could use?
Absolutely.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely. I have really loved the response with customers saying that they've tried things and that they were successful. One of our co-workers is going through the book and doing every recipe, and she comes in every week. She'll have prepared something and she's all happy because she's been successful with it. And that's the biggest joy for me, is to see that they're not only just reading it, but it's actually working also. And a lot of our customers, and this is kind of a funny note, but the ones that have been the most encouraging throughout the years, when are you going to write a cookbook? I can't wait to get your cookbook. They have it, and they come back for lunch, and I'll say, well, so have you tried? No, I love reading it, but I haven't tried anything yet. Or they'll say, my kitchen's closed, or I'll just keep coming here.
I know a lot of people who collect cookbooks, and they never cook. They just love to read them.
Read them like a novel, right?
So,
I put a few interesting facts and some family trivia in there that will, even if they don't cook, they should enjoy it.
So this will be your first Kentucky Book Fair.
Absolutely, I'm excited.
Have you ever attended as a
I have
patron?
not attended. It's on a Saturday, of course, and that is during the holidays, and Saturdays are a busier time, so usually I'm in the kitchen, and I haven't been able to attend, so I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Listen, thanks for being here, and
Thank you.
wish you all the success at the book fair.
Thank you so much.
And our third guest today is Janie McCord, and her book is Tangles Times Two. And welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I understand you're a Frankfort resident.
I am. I've lived here all my life.
And this is your first book.
Absolutely.
And tell us about your book.
Okay. Both of my parents had Alzheimer's. My father had it in the early 90s and passed in 1995. When we buried my father, my mother turned to the family and said, if that happens to me, just shoot me.
Yeah.
She was diagnosed in 2002 and passed in 2006. So as they were going through it, as Mother was going through it, I was at that time participating in a weekly poetry group. And through those years, my poems nearly all reflected what was going on with Mother. So my fellow group poets were watching, hearing it from week to week of what was going on. So it was after that, a couple of years after Mother passed, that I started thinking more and more about putting it all together and trying to recall the things that my father went through, and that took a while to go through that process.
Was it a difficult book for you to write?
In a way, yes, but the overall feeling when I was finished with it was very good. It made me feel like my parents didn't go through all of that horrible stuff for nothing. At least now their story can be shared and hopefully help others who are going through it or will go through it in the future. I think it's important when you're going through a tough time like that to realize you're not alone in your journey, that other people have been through it as well, and to reach out to those people.
Well, you've aren't you involved in some Alzheimer's support groups?
Yes, I started one where I used to work that's still going on, which I still attend, and then I've visited some others along the way as well. And I've worked with the State Alzheimer's Association a bit, doing advocate work here in the capital city during the sessions and so forth. Just